Okay, I'm the Reverend Jim Ball with the Evangelical Environmental Network, and I'm here with Matthew Frost of Tearfund. We're here at Windsor Castle at a conference together. And Matthew, why don't you just start by telling folks what Tearfund is, what you folks do?
Okay, so Tearfund is a evangelical Christian relief and development organisation. We were set up about 40 years ago by the UK Evangelical Alliance. Our vision is to see 100,000 local churches around the world bringing physical and spiritual transformation to 50 million people around the world. So we do all sorts of things around the world, working through local churches, tackling poverty and injustice.
And you've been at Tearfund now for about 5 years?
Yeah, 5.5 years.
What brought you to Tearfund?
Well, I've always had a passion for justice and the responsibility of Christians to do something through word and deed on behalf of poor people around the world. I'd worked in India when I was younger, but I've always, in many ways, most of my career has been very much the commercial world, working for the government, for McKinsey and Company, for large organisations, and I'd always want to apply all those skills to the challenge of confronting poverty and injustice through the local church.
And you were saying earlier earlier part of the conference that before you came to Tearfund, you hadn't really thought very much about climate change.
Yeah.
What have you learned in the last 5 years in your travels about climate change?
Okay, so absolutely right. When I joined, I hadn't connected at all that there was a link between the issue of climate change and the reality of life for poor people. And what I've found is after story after story, journey after journey, as I've travelled the world, I mean, I've visited places like Peru, Ethiopia, India, Cambodia, Zambia. I've been all over the world now with Tearfund. And again and again, in fact, in every single instance in the last 3 or 4 years, people are telling me, the frontline poor people, I'm talking poor families and communities, talk about how the climate is changing in the reality of their lives. So I'm hearing people talk about how there used to be water in this well, and there is now no water. I'm hearing people talk about how the season used to start precisely, almost to a week, on this day and end on the rainy season. And so they knew exactly when to plant. But now this planting season has shortened dramatically, often even by half. And not only that, when it comes now moves around, so nobody knows when to plant anymore. And when your whole life is dependent on what you grow, the reality is people die as a result. So wherever I go, I'm hearing about the impact of climate change. In Peru, I've heard stories about how people used to point up at all the glaciers in the Andes and say we used to rely on the runoff water from these glaciers, and there aren't any glaciers left, so we can no longer rely on all year round water supply, and that's had a dramatic effect on people's lives. The disasters in Pakistan, and the list is endless, it goes on and on. Wherever I go, I find that climate change is beginning to reverse all the gains we've made in development, and that is a really scary thing.
And you were sharing earlier about how you started to make your own personal changes in your life. Can you share a little bit about that?
I mean, the challenge is the reality, the way forward around climate change. There is no one big thing that will make a difference. The reality is we have to do many things. We have to do things at a national political level. So one of the things I'm doing is I get out on the streets with many other supporters across Tearfund and many other local churches to tell our government that they need to do something about this. And actually that is one of the big things that has inspired and emboldened our government to do something that is politically something that is not seen as terribly attractive, but they've done it. They've made some very firm commitments about tackling climate change. The second thing I'm seeking to do is to speak to people about it, just as I am now, speaking to people about it, about my own journey. Thirdly, there's all sorts of little things that I'm trying to do, and just my own carbon footprint, which on its own may not make a difference, but with many other people does begin to make a difference, and particularly if I do it in a way that is inspiring other people to do the same. And that's everything from trying to cycle more, use my car less, only fly when I have to, from just turning the thermostat down in my house to a whole set of things about just inspiring my own children to do different things. And the reality is almost all of those things, once you do them, they sort of get into your lifestyle, and actually they become easier and easier. And the reality is almost all of these things save you money as well. So is that a bad thing? in a time when financial conditions are pretty tough for us all.
Well, Matthew, we're so grateful for your ministry at Tearfund, and I encourage folks to find out about Tearfund. What's the website that they can go to and
find out? It's www.tearfund.org.
Great.
Great, thanks, Jim.